Welcome back. My name is Lynne Ansary. I'm director of the Kids Bridge Tolerance Center and wrote a book about empathy. I'm obsessed with empathy. Empathy Advantage, coaching children to be kind, respectful, and successful. Through the empathy lens, we can be kinder to each other, more respectful, and a more inclusive community. I am thrilled to have my friend with us today, Dr. Nadia Ansary, a professor of psychology at Rider University, and she was with me for part one where we did problems. This section, part two, is solutions. We want to figure out how we can make things better for Muslim youth, for all youth, because many youth today, sadly, are suffering from bias, harassment, intimidation. So thank you for stopping by. So welcome.
Thank you.
Nadia Ansary, doctor. So we had talked in the first session, part one, problems. Now we want to focus on solutions. And of course, I am an empathy person. So I'd like to just spend a couple minutes through with the empathy lens. How can empathy, walking in the shoes, help a Muslim family today? We talked in part one about the bullying, the cyberbullying, the 24/7, not only Muslim youth, Asian youth, LGBT, Jewish youth, Baha'i, Sikh, black and brown. I mean, who is not facing these kinds of things? How damaging it is to children at very young ages. So can we move forward with guides and coaching the people listening to walk in other people's shoes? What might that look like for a Muslim family today? I know you're raising two Muslim children. How can we better help people today?
I mean, that's a great question. I think the important thing to always keep in mind is that perspective taking is critical to understanding another person. We know from the research that even just exposure to a person of a different group decreases discrimination and, hate speech, etc. So we know that empathy works. It's just a question of how do we teach it and what tools can we, use to improve it. So for Muslim families, I think it's important to increase the communication within families and within the community, and to share these stories that of discrimination and harassment, etc. I think it's also important to take the perspective of other people from other groups. It's not just within this group. It's important to raise awareness and empathy towards all different social identities, all different people. And so I think it's important in general, and that schools are, I think, taking a much stronger role, hopefully, in promoting social emotional learning and character development. And within that is empathy plays a major, major role.
I see schools starting to lean into anti-bias now, not as young as I think we both would like it. I think the teachers need a lot more training in this aspect. Again, not to be the man up thing, but to really pay attention to each child and their needs and to work as a team with the parents. Let's maybe dissect a Muslim family, and again, it could be any family with bias and prejudice, developmentally. Let's start maybe with elementary school. So how would parents, one thing that I advise in my book is you meet around the kitchen table once a week. I know everybody's really busy. We're home a little bit more because of COVID. Hopefully COVID is gone. Like, what might that look like, these kind of conversations with an elementary school child getting bullied or maybe seeing another child bullied? And so what does that look like, this conversation, walking in each other's shoes, that they can more proactively help this child as they face the challenges as they leave the house?
So I think what we mentioned in part one was increasing communication. And sharing a meal with somebody is a personal thing. There's a personal exchange of information. Families go through their day, and again, that sharing of stories. So it's really critical to develop that sense of bonding and connection with each other. and for parents to share their own stories of, which we discussed in part one, sharing stories of their own experiences with bias, maybe in the workplace or growing up or at college or what have you. And so by being vulnerable, we also allow other people in our families to also be vulnerable and to express what may be bothering them.
So do you think by hearing their parents' or caregivers' stories, they're better prepared to anticipate this is going to happen to you? Like what I say to the kids in the Tolerance Center, or if we're in classrooms, like, you will be called a name tomorrow, in a week, in a month. You will see a child excluded. Like, it's time to prepare now. So these conversations around the dinner table, I think even in elementary school, you would advocate for that.
Absolutely. And I think it's great to have, a hypothetical response. We can't always anticipate, what's going to happen, but it's important to bolster kids and make them feel like they will be effective in these types of situations.
I like that, effective, because you don't want them floundering. But to be effective, they have to practice. So what about an elementary school kid? Can you practice that this child sees something, hears something, that they practice in the home with their parents so that they are prepared?
I think so, and siblings can be really helpful here too, through the sharing of stories, or my friend sharing of not only their stories but of their peers. I know of a girl who this happened and here's how she responded. And so I think that can be very helpful.
So let's intersect now what we talked about briefly in part one, ethnic identity and religious orientation. So the research says this empowers and strengthens a child. Elementary school, when do they start learning about Islam and multiculturalism and other religions? How early should parents, if they don't belong to a mosque or they don't belong to a synagogue, when should parents start their benefits to impart this religious heritage identity strength?
Well, I think each family has to do what's natural for them, and it's always best to start early. But you have to do what's the best fit for your family. And I think that just like with ethnic identity, these are things that sort of come naturally, right? This is our traditional food that we eat at this time during this holiday. We believe in this practice and not that practice. So I think it's just something that organically happens within families. Right. But to recognize that it can add dimensions to an individual's identity, and that also leads to higher self-esteem.
Absolutely. So now I'll throw you a curveball. Middle schoolers, this is the toughest thing we'll probably discuss. So, right, you don't want to talk to your parents, they're embarrassing, they know everything, independence, and it's a very tumultuous time for a middle schooler. So how, for a child who doesn't want to talk to you or look at you or spend time with you, is there any way any parents can really infuse this pride of religion, heritage, ethnic identity?
I think that's where community comes in, where if parents can help foster relationships with other families and spend time with other families, and if they're lucky enough their kids connect and become friends,
good point,
then that source of strength can come from the peer network, because as adolescence comes in, we see a shift away from parents and a shift towards peers, because they're spending most of their days and time with their peers, much more than with parents. So if there is a connection with other families within the community that they can foster and develop those relationships, I think it's extremely valuable, because then you have children who share behaviors and thoughts and practices, and they can help each other navigate those situations.
That was a brilliant answer. I love that.
For a curveball.
Well, middle schoolers, right? They don't. Just the things that I hear associated with Kidsbridge, the children are grunting. They're not even talking to you. And my kids, how was your day? Grunt, I don't know. So in any event. So let's now lean into high school, because now high schoolers are turning a little bit more into human beings. And so I think that there's more that families can do, again, back to the ethnic identity, that not only the pride, the meals, the heritage, the holidays, but how about giving back? Can a family do something for Afghan refugees? Can a family, what can they role model, right? They're role modelers
Sure.
to their high schools. What kind of things could they do as a family to give back and inspire this kind of pride?
Absolutely. And I mean, for high schoolers, service is always an important element that, volunteer work, et cetera. So families can do that together. So I think that essentially what's developmentally changing from elementary school into high school is the idea of identity formation getting stronger, and also the ability to abstractly reason and see oneself within a community, and so that they recognize that their identity may not be something that's valued by everybody in society.
Indeed.
And so it's important to gather those experiences and relationships with other folks who do value you, so that it can help bolster self-esteem.
Right.
So, recognizing that your identity or a facet of your identity may not be valued it can be difficult. And going back to something you said earlier, the idea that you will be called a name at some point. There are some people who are fortunate enough for various reasons not to.
Right.
But for the vast majority of people with marginalized identities, it will likely happen. And so that fear, that anxiety, that knowledge is what makes bias-based bullying particularly damaging. And we know that it's more damaging than other forms of bullying because the individual expects that future incidents will happen because their identity is what it is, and it's a stable characteristic of who they are.
Right. One of the most surprising things I learned early by looking at the research is that in a system of bullying, you have victims who we call targets now, bullying the name callers, but in the system of, say, 100 people, the majority in this bullying system are bystanders. And they are the majority, and they are doing nothing. They are bystanding. So that when people actually see that those, and we're not supposed to use the word bully, those who cause harm, are in the minority, it should give high schoolers or people in office situations the power to do what was right. So let's take a scenario in high school. A Muslim girl is wearing hijab, and I read many stories of this, I'm sure as you do. The kids pull it off, and they tease her, and they mimic her. So what should a high schooler do? This is something a high schooler witnesses in the hall. So what is the right system for this child? What can they do? And sometimes she can't do that by themselves. What are the different avenues upon which to remedy this situation?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that the high schooler doesn't need to be Superman or Superwoman and jump into the situation,
Right.
Or do something that they're terribly uncomfortable doing
By themselves. Right.
So it's important to recognize that there are other things that you can do. And let's be clear, a bullying situation would not be a bullying situation if there are no bystanders. So if people are not standing around, then the individual who's bullying or perpetrating the bullying doesn't get the effect, right? Because it's based on all these people viewing this power dynamic, So it's important to, if you don't feel like you can jump in and stop it, you can run and get an adult. You can, maybe if the incident was difficult for, again, somebody to jump in, you can go to the target afterwards and say, I saw what happened to you, and I'm really
Wonderful.
I'm really upset about it,
Right.
and what can I do to help? That sort of empathy is really critical in letting the target of the bullying situation know that they are a valued member of that school community. And that is the message that we need to get across, because you and I have talked about this this report, the Hate in Schools report by
Yes.
Southern Poverty
Yes.
Law Center.
Yes.
What they did in that report, they surveyed teachers, and teachers talked about hate in school. And what they said was that the majority of hate incidents go undisciplined. And so that is really a terrible outcome, because what it does is it tells the target of the bullying that you are not an important part of our school community, and that there are people who are important, but you're not one of them.
Right.
And so when a bystander goes to a target afterwards and tries to say, yeah, I'm really sorry this happened to you, how can I help? Or, even sometimes you can anticipate that aggression is going to happen, that a situation is escalating,
Right.
towards a bullying situation.
Right.
You could say, hey, so-and-so, I know Mr. Smith was looking for you earlier. He asked me to come find you. Right? You can diffuse the situation by,
Right.
so there's a lot of different ways to diffuse the situation or try to remedy it afterwards by letting the person know that they are important.
Right. So in what I've read, the research, one of the most effective strategies to disrupt the system is active listening. Just one person othered at home, feeling so isolated that just one person picking up the phone can almost sometimes save a life. So that's really important. And at Kidsbridge, and I know you've heard this word, upstander, a bystander who takes action, stands up and speaks out. So
Absolutely, and we need more upstanders, because if we think about bullying, it's important also, I think we may not have defined bullying for listeners and
Yeah.
in our solutions
Yeah.
part. So we want to keep in mind that bullying has three parts, right?
Yes.
A malicious intent to harm,
Yes.
an imbalance of power such that the person can't defend him or herself, and that there's a repetition or a pattern of abuse.
over time, yeah.
So if we can break the chain in any of those three parts,
Right.
where empathy can come in,
Right.
and that person can try to diffuse that power differential or diffuse the situation, then again, we might have a better way to address the problem.
I think also, to back up, implicit in your thoughts were a team. Be a team with your school counselor. Be a team with the bus driver. If it happens on the bus, your parents or your peers, your friends.
Right.
You don't have to do it alone. And I think that makes people a little bit bolder. And then, of course, practice, because it will come, it will happen. And so at Kidsbridge or in the home, skit scenarios, what would you do?
Right.
So I'd like to lean into a new topic, literature. I know, and we know from research, that literature and stories, walking in others' shoes, creates empathy. And I think we need to, we could talk about media for an hour, but media and the cell phones is really shutting down, tamping down empathy, that it is actually declining. It's been measured for college students and high schoolers, and then behind, so to establish empathy. How can we use stories, literature, to fix some of this, to fix the problem of bias, discrimination? Do you have books that you have used with your family, or that you use your college professor, that might be creating empathy for your college students? Because I think this is job one, is really to feel and to care for others, of course for yourself and others, and then upon which that you take action. But if you're not feeling for others and caring about others, you're not inclined to do anything.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to, you and I both have a very similar focus of early prevention. And this is where storytelling can can make a really big impact, where stories involve, you know, protagonists who look different, who are not necessarily, you know, Caucasian, but have different racial and ethnic backgrounds and different religious identities. And I think that is that's growing in volume and in diversity, you know, that now there are far more books that have different protagonists and different looking heroes and heroines in there. Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember a time, Barnes & Noble, I walked, this was, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago, I walked down the aisle and they were all faces of white children. I think there was one black or brown person, and I went to the, I won't name the bookstore, although I already did, and say that you need to do more than this because a child is other, not seeing themselves represented there. But I just wanted folks listening to know that literature as early as board books, to show pluralism and, you know, different ethnicities can be strong.
And now, for example, there are books on Ramadan. So those books don't necessarily need to be for Muslim families. So non-Muslim families can buy those books and talk to their kids. Oh, you know, there's, you know, let's talk about this holiday that Muslims are going to be, you know, celebrating, and here's the purpose for the holiday and the sort of the spirit of the holiday.
Right.
And so sort of having this appreciation and respect for diversity is really important, and then goes back to what you were saying earlier about enhancing empathy.
So parents can take this role and maybe recommend books, go to the library, order books that teach about other religions and the Golden Rule and such. So for our parents, caregivers, teachers listening now, what have we not touched upon? How do we better and earlier, because we're real, as prevention people, really advocates for earlier, what other advice can we give to people to help push back bias and discrimination and make the children who are young now that rise up, that they can be, maybe live in a world where there's less of this, more commonality, more trust, less otherness. I mean, it's a world that when I was in college, I thought I would see today, and I am disappointed. So I think we all need to do more. What other things can people listening do to learn more about Islam, the pluralism that you adopt? What else can people do to participate?
So a lot of my scholarship has focused on schools, and I think it's an important part of our anti-bullying approach, and particularly for bias-based bullying. I think we need more substantial teacher training so that teachers feel effective in intervening when a hate incident happens. And I think too often that training doesn't happen in sufficient depth. We also need anti-bias training for educators and administrators to recognize bias and to also engage in more culturally responsive teaching practices. The Institute for Teaching Diversity and Social Justice.
Wow. I didn't know they exist. That sounds fabulous.
Yeah, so they undertake anti-bias teacher trainings to work on developing more culturally responsive teaching practices. So schools really have a lot of work to do, in my view.
Right.
I think also there's a lot more resources out there for Muslim families to access. So, for example, just to backtrack, ING, Islamic Networks Groups, they have toolkits for teachers to teach Islam in a more balanced fashion, and to eliminate or reduce misinformation about Islam. So there are toolkits for teachers. The Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, ISPU, they have toolkits for families. Family Youth Institute also also have some toolkits on bullying and resources for parents.
Wonderful.
So there is information out there. It's just about finding it and accessing it.
But with today's internet, I think, you know, parents and adults can find these things easier. Children, teens can explore this and find these resources, that everybody can do something. So I'm hoping that with these solutions, there is so much more we can do, that people listening will be inspired to you don't have to do all of this. Do one thing, maybe once a week with your family. Listen to your children, hear what they're hearing, and have an open door to them, that if they are suffering or they are witnessing an incident of bias. So, you know, I think, as I know, that when you're a bystander and you're witnessing a girl's hijab being, or, you know, all Muslims are terrorists, when you hear that stereotype and you don't do something, there is damage to you, psychological damage to you as a bystander.
Sure.
So don't think just because your kids are not being affected as a part of society, they are, which is why it's incumbent upon all of us to take this seriously and do more for our children. So there are a lot of resources and things that families can do, I think.
Absolutely.
Good.
And your book has really quite a lot of, you know, you break it down. You have a lot of information for teachers and a lot of information for parents. And so it doesn't have to be a massive undertaking. It could just be some small steps that, you know, that sort of make your orientation you know, more sensitive to bias.
Well, thank you for that, because yes, the Empathy Advantage book, preschool, elementary, middle, high school, college, that it drills down to what are the things you can do. And the book is full of tips and resources that, you know, if you can just do one thing, do that one thing. Mm-hmm. So with a magic wand, we hope that when our children grow up, that they're going to feel more included, and we're a multicultural society, and we are just treat others as you would like to be treated. Absolutely. So thank you for helping me explore solutions, and I want to thank you. So thank you for joining us today for Solutions. We hope that you will take some of our tips and suggestions to help all of our children and reduce bias and discrimination for all of our children. We are one society. So this is Lynne Ansary with Dr. Ansary, signing off, saying thank you, and have a nice day, and thank you for joining us for Solutions for Reducing Bias and Discrimination. Have a great day. Thank you.